When we think of things we fear most, losing our identity or control over ourselves remains one of the most daunting experiences. This fear is an innate part of being human, and the Star Trek universe captured it perfectly when they introduced the Borg. This mysterious species was known for assimilating others into their larger collective, meaning that anyone who fell victim to them no longer had any control over their bodies. Instead, these victims existed as mere shadows of their former selves, as the Borg rewired their senses, swapped out biological functions, and even connected them to their shared intelligence. While this sounds frightening enough, this barely scratches the surface of the Borg's Hive-Mind anatomy, and today I'll be taking you through all of its details as we look into what really happens when the Borg takes over an individual. Does the person remain trapped beneath all the implants? Do they become nothing but a replaceable terminal for the collective? Or something in between? Let's find out together. Are the Borg one species? Before we dig into the complexities of the transformation, let me take you through some basic features of the Borg. To begin with, they're best described as a cybernetic civilization, or a pseudo-species, as they've evolved into their current form after assimilating innumerable other species. They didn't really differentiate between humans, Klingons, Hirogens, Brunali, or other species, and the variety of species assimilated into their collective further made them a diverse, adaptive species with impressive technological capabilities. These cyborgs were on a lifelong mission to attain perfection by forcibly assimilating these species and adding their knowledge to their hive mind while turning their victims into members of their standardized population, making it safe to say that they are one species. However, their history as an individual species has been defined by absorbing other species, while their birthplace and original biology remain unknown even today. Some sources have confirmed that they reside within the Delta Quadrant, but there is no confirmed canon, despite what many novels or games might say. The Borg first became well known in the Star Trek universe in the Next Generation second season, 16th episode, Q Who, wherein Picard is determined to explore System J-25, despite Guinan's repeated warnings. Soon enough, the Enterprise's crew watches as the Borg cube approaches them, and Guinan then explains that the ship belonged to a cybernetic race that led to her species' near extinction over a century ago. She even warns them that the Borg might destroy them, but Picard has other intentions, and he works alongside Q to figure out what the Borg might want from them. As one of the Borg makes its way onto their ship, they notice that it's mostly interested in their technology and even attack it, which makes things worse as plenty more of them soon make their way onto the Enterprise. With a full-fledged Borg attack on their hands, the Enterprise's crew learns that the Borg do not negotiate with people, and they operate within a hive mind with no specific leader. Things spiral out of control as the Borg lock onto their ship with a tractor beam, making it impossible for them to move, while Picard orders Riker, Worf, and Data to learn more about the Borg. As they make their way onto the Borg cube, they stumble upon their nursery full of Borg, where they learn that they're born as biological life forms who undergo cybernetic enhancements and can link artificial intelligence into the humanoid brain. They even discover several Borg in stasis in their Regeneration alcoves, and it's interesting how the Enterprise's crew makes several snap judgments about how they operate and reproduce. While we've learned a lot more about them over the years in the Next Generation episodes and other related franchise material, the Borg remain a mysterious species, which only adds to the primal fear felt by characters who fall victim to their assimilation. Who was the very first Borg actually born? While we know that Borg have a complex, standard process to enhance humanoids with cybernetic implants, fans have often wondered how the very first Borg came into existence. I mean, there surely must be someone out there who first figured out how to create a cybernetic implant, connect it to an organic body, and then scale it into an empire of billions of drones. However, the Borg Queen has been sparse with her revelations, only hinting at how the Borg were once organic before they underwent this cybernetic transformation. This has only fueled other theories about them using artificial intelligence, medical experimentation, and even forced cybernetic evolution to come to this point. Other rumors hint at the civilization voluntarily coming together to link their minds. These theories become all the more tempting to believe when Star Trek canon refuses to confirm any one origin story regarding the collective. Many non-canon novels and games have taken it upon themselves to build origin stories of their own. These stories range from suggestions that the collective came into existence as a desperate attempt to survive, to tales of them being around for as long as the universe has existed. But canon only brought them to light in the Delta Quadrant in 1484. While most stories are speculation, we do know that the Borg had control over a bunch of systems in the Delta Quadrant in 1484, but they soon sped things up and gained absolute control over thousands of worlds by 2373. What is still biological underneath all that machinery? Now, we might not know much about where the first Borg came from or how they went about introducing cybernetic implants, but there are plenty of Borg sightings that have helped us work out what their physiology looks like. To begin with, there is an organic body at the core of all the armor, wiring, and prosthetic limbs, and Borg drones are known to have brains, organs, skin, muscles, and even blood that keeps them alive even after undergoing technologically advanced procedures to have layers of cybernetic implants covering up the core body. At the end of the day, Borg physique was all about a balance between organic and artificial components, and their drones had a lot of variation in terms of this balance. Typically, all Borg drones are seen to have pale skin, replaced limbs, and external tubing in addition to exoplating and neural processors. But there was no standardization in terms of these implants, and every drone received its own custom modifications depending on its job. For instance, a particular drone might require more medical repair modifications, and another might need a better set of tactical capabilities. In any case, all implants enhanced their biological strength and took them to a whole new level, and they were all fitted with some standard devices, including a homing device with a translink frequency that helped them stay in touch with the collective. However, at the end of the day, all this machinery was an add-on to their existing biological bodies, as evidenced in scenarios such as the Next Generation's 5th season, 23rd episode, I, Borg, where we can clearly spot Hugh's damaged arm, biological face, and ocular implant, as well as his injuries that made him come across as a living organism more than a faceless cyborg. Even if their bodies were covered with exoplating, the Borg were also biological beings who suffered injuries and felt pain when their bodies were pushed beyond their limits. How does assimilation physically invade the body? Now, the process of a host turning into a Borg was a complicated sport in itself, and assimilation started with the Borg assessing if a victim was worthy of being added to the collective's perfection. If they deemed the victim's technology and biological distinctiveness worthy enough, then they moved on to forcibly assimilating them into their collective through a process that largely ignored the species' will. In fact, they considered their victim's species' consent to the matter to be irrelevant, and typically assimilated larger groups, such as starship crews or entire populations, with little focus towards smaller groups or individuals. They only ever paid such attention and put an energy into assimilating an individual if they showed worthy traits, so chances of isolated individuals falling into their paths were a lot less than those of big starship crews. Once the Borg had set their sights on a target species, the assimilation process began with Borg nanoprobes being attached to the host's red blood cells so that they could circulate through their bodies. These nanoprobes can best be described as microscopic robotic devices that spread through the victim's skin and self-replicate to produce larger constructs that aided the assimilation process. In no time, these nanoprobes laid the foundation for bigger Borg implants, while the host was also injected with lithium ion to support this process. As the process picked up pace, the nanoprobes successfully created rudimentary Borg implants on the victim's faces or limbs, and a mature drone could contain up to 3.6 million nanoprobes that aided constant functionality. However, this started with the assembling of the neural transceiver that allowed the collective to peek into the victim's mind and gain control over their body. Around the same time, the drone's body was also fitted with a vocal subprocessor, while their original skin had molted away to give way to the standard pale gray skin. In some cases, their skin and face were slightly deformed as a result of the implants growing in their body, and soon enough they were taken to the Borg facilities to have bigger, more advanced implants surgically installed. This included the exoplating, tools, and weapons, which completed the biological assimilation, while the neural transceiver had taken care of the mental assimilation by connecting them to the collective's hive-mind. In this way, the assimilation process was a forced reconstruction, and it should also be noted that it's only recently that Star Trek canon introduced nanoprobes. While Dr. Phlox's transformation in Star Trek Enterprise's second season is nanoprobe-based and comes off as an aggressive biological process, assimilation once used to be more surgery and external machinery-based, as evidenced in Picard's conversion. Why was Locutus built differently from an ordinary drone? Speaking of Picard, I'm sure you must be itching to point out that he was rather recognizable even after transforming into Locutus, and that he had retained his intellect, facial features, and voice, a privilege that most Borg victims didn't have. As it turns out, there was a good reason behind this exceptional case, and the collective was hoping for him to act as their spokesperson, who could present assimilation as organized surrender to the rest of the universe. If Picard had undergone the typical Borg assimilation process, he would not have retained enough humanity to come across as relatable, which is why he had retained individuality, an ability to refer to himself as I and not we, as well as specialized arm equipment and access to Starfleet knowledge. In this way, his assimilation gave the Borg access to his life experiences, personal history, and a peek into Federation technology and strategy, all of which later helped the Borg in their fight against Starfleet at Wolf 359. Some of Picard's special features can be attributed to the fact that the Borg Queen had taken interest in his integration, in the hopes of him becoming an equal to her, which is why he might have been allowed greater flexibility than most Borg victims. How does the collective physically enter a drone's mind? Coming back to most Borg victims, or future drones, there's the bigger question of how the collective manages to enter their minds. Well, the Hive-Mind is no simple telepathy, and it functions with the help of an elaborate network of subspace transceivers that keep the collective up and running. These neural transceivers are fitted into the drones as part of the assimilation process, and are typically implanted in their upper spinal column. In this way, the collective could access the individual's brains, and also send thoughts, instructions, and sensory information through their communication network. The elaborate nature of their hive mind can best be explained as billions of voices instead of internal silence. And to add to it, the collective also had the ability to restrict individual thoughts and guide certain behaviors among the drones, when required. Sometimes, other species with hive minds could also link with the Borg collective, but this proved to be an overwhelming experience, as evidenced by the Medusan Zero's experience. However, the drones were rather used to living as part of the hive mind, and an episode of Star Trek Voyager's 6th season, Survival Instinct, even depicts 4 separated drones as they come together to create a small neural link to share their memories and thoughts after their connection to the collective is disrupted. What happens when a drone can no longer hear the hive? Speaking of disrupted connections, it's important to highlight that drones suffer real psychological trauma upon being separated from the collective, and consider this to be a medical emergency of the highest regard. Since drones had grown dependent on their implants, artificial organs, and Borg biochemical processes, they struggled to revert to their human selves and come to terms with their newfound individuality. The best example of this is 7 of 9 during Star Trek Voyager's 4th season's 2nd episode, The Gift, wherein she is distressed after realizing that she can no longer hear the collective. While the doctor reports that her human physiology has been quick to reassert itself, Janeway orders that they should wake up 7, only for her to be supremely distressed over her fate. In fact, she even angrily demands to be returned to the Borg and is baffled at the idea of embracing her newfound individuality. She goes as far as to demand to be left on a planet with subspace transceivers so that she can get in touch with the Borg on her own, and even when her body starts rejecting Borg implants, she demands that her human side be suppressed at once. As things progress, 7 spirals and screams, "We are Borg!" until the doctor has no choice but to sedate her. And all of this shows the impact that the collective had on those who were assimilated into their system. 7 of 9's insistence on returning to the Borg further highlights the kind of therapy and reconstruction that rehabilitated drones might require after their connection is severed, and some aspect of Borg physiology remain with them even later. In 7's case, the doctor removed around 82% of Borg implants, but some technology remained embedded into her vitals and was impossible to get rid of. For instance, she initially needed a Borg alcove until her natural metabolism regained strength, and it took her over 2 decades to fully let go of regeneration cycles. After returning to her human self, she still retained superior visual acuity and an eidetic memory, in addition to superhuman strength, durability, and the ability to serve as a host to holographic characters due to the remnant Borg features that lived on as a part of her. Do Borg drones sleep, eat, or simply recharge? Now that I've talked about 7's struggle with letting go of regeneration, I'm sure you must have questions about what this really meant for the Borg. Well, you can think of regeneration as a means of survival, and just like humans need to eat and sleep, Borg drones needed time in the regeneration alcoves that maintain their biological tissues, replenish their cybernetic systems, and went into stasis. In this time, they did remain partially aware of everything that was going on in the collective, and every drone had their own needs in terms of regeneration cycles. The cycle duration also depended on their age, species, and how long it had been since their last regeneration, and if they were injured, but it typically averaged at around 6 hours. Usually drones could go about 200 hours without regeneration, but this varied from drone to drone. For instance, 7 of 9 had to regenerate for at least 3 hours daily after her connection was severed, but there are special cases to every rule. Typically, the drones stood straight in their alcoves that appeared in the form of slots along the wall, and Star Trek Voyager's 5th season 15th episode, Dark Frontier, even gives us a glimpse into this process. As the drones enter these compartments, they have provisions to connect a coupling on their arm to ensure energy flow, as well as other tubes that connect directly with the drone's body parts. How do Borg bodies learn to resist weapons? Coming back to Borg drones' self-defense abilities, their bodies had a built-in personal force field that could block energy-based weapons, such as phasers and phase pistols. To achieve this, the collective actively studied the frequencies of incoming energy weapon attacks, and replicated those same frequencies in each individual's personal energy shield, spreading this solution across nearby units, which highlights their quick thinking and adaptability. Even if they were not entirely invulnerable, the Borg surely knew how to use their hive mind to spread messages fast and adapt to incoming attacks, and they continued to try their best even if they sometimes fell victim to physical projectiles, strategies involving rotating frequencies, or specialized weapons built to target their vulnerabilities. For instance, the Starfleet's phaser adapter was built with a resonance frequency that the Borg were vulnerable to, and later on Starfleet even tweaked this solution by retuning phasers to work on a rotating frequency module that targeted the Borg before they could adapt to the changes. Why does every Borg drone look like a different machine? At this stage, we all know that the Borg were largely humans, humanoid species, or other species assimilated into one, which explains why they all had some individual characteristics. Admittedly, they were designed to appear as cyborgs, but even among the Borg, their bodies were built to serve varying purposes. This explains the mismatched limbs, varying mechanical hands, cranial plates, exposed organic flesh, tubes poking in and out, and exposed wiring. And even within the Star Trek universe, they went through a creative redesign in First Contact to have a darker, more biomechanical appearance. However, the main reason behind them appearing as different machines is that their bodies were superimposed with external implants that varied depending on the task they were supposed to perform. Are Borg born, grown, or only assimilated? While we mostly talk of the Borg as a species that has been assimilated into these cyborg beings, there's a lot of talk about whether the Borg are born, grown, or only assimilated. The controversial question has been around since Star Trek The Next Generation's episode Q Who, implying that the Borg are biological infants who receive implants shortly after birth, while Voyager presented the view that the collective does not reproduce in a way that humanoids do, and instead takes assimilated children and grows them in maturation chambers. Now, we can say that Voyager built upon the primitive theory presented in Q Who, when the Borg were a fairly new concept, but over the years, the Borg are primarily known for expanding their species with the help of nurseries or maturation chambers. These chambers were devices that accelerated the growth of young humanoids so that they could be ready to serve as drones, and some famous names that came out of these chambers were 7 of 9, Icheb, and Meryl. Typically, these children spent 17 cycles in the chamber before emerging as a drone and receiving further instructions from the collective regarding their post. In this way, the Borg did grow by assimilating children and then placing them in these chambers to serve as future drones. But there were exceptions here and there. One such exception was the drone 1, who grew at a pace that was 25 times faster than usual with some help from a maturation chamber created from 7 of 9's nanoprobes. But this was an isolated, extraordinary accident. What implants keep the entire Borg body alive? After the drones went through the maturation chamber and the implantation and connection process, they further survived with the help of their cortical node that kept them up and running. This node single-handedly ensured that the implants were integrated with living tissue and further regulated all other implants, supported vital functions, and had safeguards to suppress human emotions and individuality. While the Star Trek universe often uses words such as cortical node, cortical implant, and array to refer to this, these terms seem to hold different meanings. However, the most critical of them definitely is the cortical node, and you might remember 7 of 9's struggle when her failing cortical node resulted in her collapse. In Star Trek Voyager's 7th season, 2nd episode, Imperfection, we learned that the cortical node was placed above the right eyebrow and was single-handedly responsible for controlling all their implants. Any malfunctions in it could result in all their implants being rejected and eventually causing the drone's death, and any damage to this node had to be immediately fixed by replacing the node entirely. It was essentially the beating heart of the drone's new physique, and it even had mechanisms in place to suppress the drone's sense of individuality and ensure that they remain within the collective's control. Keeping this in mind, it's understandable why the malfunction in 7's cortical node resulted in her crying, revealing that she had started getting in touch with her human side in the aftermath of the node's collapse. Eventually, she survives after Icheb gives up his own cortical node implant, and they perform a transplant to fit it in 7's body, highlighting just how critical this one node is to the Borg's survival. Is the Borg Queen a person, a body, or an interface? Moving on to the Borg Queen, we have all wondered about the Borg Queen's identity, and if she was even a real person. As it turns out, the Borg Queen is the single most powerful entity within the Borg, who claims to embody the entire collective. It's rather contradictory how a hive-mind species has an individual spokesperson, and as far as leaders go, the Borg Queen has an organic head and spinal column lowered into an artificial body. While numerous Borg Queens have appeared in the course of Star Trek history, there's no canon history confirming whether they're copies, successors, or parallel manifestations of the same. In fact, some rumors even suggest that the Borg Queen is one singular consciousness being transferred into new hosts, but the official discussion maintains that there's typically one active Borg Queen at a time. This Borg Queen allegedly contains the collective consciousness of all previous queens and is the only member of the collective capable of individual thought. The first Borg Queen, Alice Krieg, debuted in Star Trek First Contact in 1996, and since then Susanna Thompson and Annie Wershing have also played the character in Voyager and Picard. Can Borg anatomy survive injuries that would kill anyone else? As we near the end of this video, it would be a grave injustice to gloss over the invulnerability and ignore questions about their ability to survive fatal injuries. Well, no higher power has blessed the Borg with immortality, and the only reason why they managed to function through severe injuries is some good old technology. The nanoprobes that first enter their body during assimilation are capable of repairing any damage to both biological as well as mechanical elements, and in some cases, they could revive drones buried in ice for over a century, and even heal an unassimilated individual about 18 hours after their death. The drone's artificial systems further make it possible for them not to die the second they take a hit, and if this was not enough, the Borg also has a comprehensive regeneration system in the form of the alcoves that we explored earlier. Now, all this makes it easy for the Borg to survive most attacks, but at the end of the day, damage to their brain, cortical nodes, or essential implants can still result in their death. Did Picard reveal a completely new form of assimilation? Now, you might be thinking that you know everything there is to know about the Borg, but well, there's always something new to learn when it comes to this species. For instance, Star Trek Picard's 3rd season's 9th episode, Vox, revealed that the Borg had altered Picard's organic DNA and created a receiver that was inherited by Jack Crusher. To put it in simpler words, the Borg had written and stored a new genetic code in Picard when they captured him to keep receiving information from him. Jack Crusher came into play as a transmitter. What this means is that the Borg had managed to tweak transporter systems in a way that they could target young Starfleet personnel under the age of 25 and remotely insert Borg genetic material into their bodies. With Jack serving as their transmitter, the Borg used Jack to send instructions to the young Starfleet officers, which came as a huge shock, as Jack had managed to keep this part of himself dormant for most of his life. While many aspects of this mechanism remain unexplained, it's terrifying to learn that the Borg had evolved from controlling species through visible implants to now using hidden, remote genetic engineering to prey on unsuspecting victims, and take control over Starfleet without even fighting a physical battle. The Changelings also played a major role in the Borg's success with this form of assimilation, and it was a shocker for us all to learn that they had been working as their allies all along. Is there a person trapped inside every drone? Finally, it would be a disservice to all those fallen heroes who were assimilated by the collective if we didn't take a moment to honor their humanity and take a second to think of them as people. Now, there are debates over whether there is a person trapped inside every drone, but to me, it's a lot simpler than what most fans make it out to be. Individuals who have survived the assimilation and turned into drones, only to be eventually liberated, such as Hugh, 7 of 9, Picard, and Icheb, are living proof that there is a person trapped inside every drone. Admittedly, recovery is a long journey, and not every individual can bounce back as their past self after such an existence-altering ordeal. But this also depends on the duration of assimilation, brain condition, nature of implants, and the person at the end. Sadly enough, not every single drone can be restored, and there's no telling whether or not the liberated individual will ever get their original personality back. But there are more than enough instances to prove that there is a person trapped inside each drone. Star Trek The Next Generation's 5th season's 23rd episode, I, Borg, makes a compelling case for this, as Hugh goes from identifying himself as 3rd of 5 to eventually accepting his identity as Hugh. Granted, he takes his time regaining his self-identity, and has a hard time accepting that humans did not want to be assimilated. But this is only natural when you've spent so much time in a hive mind that actively teaches you otherwise. Over time, it's impressive how Hugh gains a name through mispronouncing you, identifies Picard as Locutus while establishing that resistance was not futile, and that LaForge did not wish to be assimilated. This shows great progress for someone who had spent a large chunk of their lives believing that all species wanted to be assimilated. And as Hugh's individuality returns, he even refers to himself as I instead of we, thereby proving that at the heart of each drone lies a person. Marvelous verdict. On that note, I believe we've explored everything you could have ever wanted to know about the Borg, ranging from their hive mind to their regeneration abilities, assimilation, and day-to-day functioning. It's fascinating how this species has managed to create a self-sustained hive mind by taking the best out of every other species out there. But that's enough from me. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below.